build buildings, collecting resources and gold bars, and get ready for showdowns between the town's notorious characters. But first, you must grab a Fistful of Meeples. Do you want to learn how to play a Fistful of Meeples?
In this video, we're going to take you through the full rules of the game, and if you stay tuned till the end, you can pick up some tips and strategies along the way. Coming up. Hi, it's Tarrant.
And Stella from Meeple University, bringing you a variety of quality board game videos.
Now, let's get to the rules of A Fistful of Meeples, a game by Johnny Pat Canton and published by Final Frontier Games. A Fistful of Meeples is a quick-playing Mancala game set in the Wild West. On each turn, players pick up all the meeples from one location and then drop them off progressively around the board, followed by taking actions at each of those locations. Players gain their resources and their points by winning gunfights, building buildings, upgrading buildings, and collecting gold bars. The game will end after all the gold bars are taken, or all the grave slots are filled, or all the dynamite has exploded, and the player with the highest score wins. In this video, we're showing you a prototype copy of the game. The art rules and components may not be final, and some of the components that we're looking at in this video are different colours to those that will be in the final game, and we'll point that out as we go along. To set up the game, each player takes 8 building tiles and a disc in his or her colour. The building tiles are all the same, and they have a 5-point side and a 10-point side. You'll be using the 5-point side first. On the main board, place the 3 red dynamite pieces in the jail, and place the 6 gold bars in the bank. Take the sole pink meeple, which is purple in the prototype that we have here, and place it in the saloon space. This represents the madam. Then mix up all of the rest of the meeples and place 3 into each of the 12 buildings. In this prototype copy, all of the builder meeples are white. They'll be brown in the final version. Choose a first player, and then in turn order, each player chooses one of the 4 corner buildings and places one of his or her building marquee tiles on the 5-point side into that building. Finally, take all of the gold and stone pieces and place them into the mining bag. There is twice as much gold as there is stone. You're now ready to play. Each player's turn takes place over 4 steps. Firstly, the player chooses a location and picks up all of the meeples in that location. Secondly, in Mancala style, players will drop those meeples progressively around the board in one or the other direction. Meeples are placed in the doorway spaces in front of buildings or in the showdown spaces at opposite ends of the street. Thirdly, in any order that he or she wishes, the player may activate each meeple that he or she has on the board, taking the action of the space before pushing the meeple into that building. Finally, if a player has collected enough gold pieces to buy the next gold bar on the board, he or she automatically buys that gold bar. Play then passes to the next player clockwise, who does these 4 steps as well, and so on around the table until the end of the game. The end of the game can be triggered in one of 3 ways: by all the dynamite being drawn, by all of the gold bars being purchased, or by all of the graveyard spaces being filled. Play continues until all players have had the same number of turns, and then whoever has the highest score wins. So now let's look at each step in more detail. The first step of each turn is to choose a location from which to take the meeples. There are 14 such locations on the board: the 12 buildings in the main street, the saloon, and the jail. If you take them from a building or from the saloon, simply pick up the meeples into your fist. If you take them from the jail, you pick up the meeples and then take one of the dynamite cubes and place it into the mining bag with all of the stone and gold. We'll explain how dynamite is resolved later in the video. The second step is to place your meeples, and this resolves a little bit differently depending on whether you've taken the meeples from a building or from the saloon or jail. If you've taken your meeples from a building, you must start by dropping a meeple on the first space clockwise or anti-clockwise, and then continue placing in that direction. So for that placement, the player could place meeples here or here. If you place a meeple onto a showdown space, then place your coloured disc next to it. You won't necessarily be resolving this meeple on your turn. If, when you're placing meeples, you come up to a showdown space which is already occupied, simply skip over that space and continue placing. Note that if ever you were to place the madam into a showdown space, instead move her back to the saloon, leaving the showdown space empty. If you choose to take the meeples from the saloon or from the jail, placement goes in the same way except that you can choose your starting location on the street. You are not limited to having to start adjacent to the place you pick the meeples up from. Once you finish placing all your meeples onto doorways or showdown spaces, proceed to the meeple resolution phase. To start this phase, the player will have a series of meeples on doorway spaces or the showdown space. The player may resolve all of these meeples in the order of his or her choice. Each meeple has a different effect depending on its colour and depending on the meeples in its building. Once a player has resolved a specific meeple, that meeple goes into the building to keep track of which actions you've performed and to leave it there ready to be picked up on a future player's turn. So now let's look at how each type of meeple resolves. Resolving a builder, represented by the white meeple in this video or a brown meeple in the game, allows the player to build or upgrade marquee tiles on buildings. If there is no marquee tile on a building, then the player whose turn it is may resolve that meeple by paying the resources shown, returning those cubes to the mining bag, and then placing one of his or her marquee tiles onto that space on the 5-point side up. If there is already a marquee tile there with the 5-point side up, then the player who owns that tile may activate the building by, again, paying the resources shown to flip that tile over to the 10-point side. This action goes to the player who owns the tile, even if it's not that player's turn. A builder at a location where the 10-point side is already showing has no effect. Resolving a miner at a building with marquee tiles is a way of gaining resources. Resolving a miner at a building with the 5-point side showing allows the owner of that tile to draw 2 pieces from the bag. Resolving a miner at a building with the 10-point side showing allows its owner to draw 4 pieces from the bag. Once again, these pieces go to the player who owns the tile, not the player whose turn it is. A miner at a building with no marquee tile has no effect. Resolving robbers, represented by the red meeples, is a way of stealing resources from miners. When the robber is activated at a building containing 1 or more miners, then the player draws 2 pieces from the bag for each miner in that location. These pieces go to the player whose turn it is, regardless of any tiles or other ownership in that building. Resolving a deputy, represented by the blue meeple, allows the player to gain fines from any robbers who are in that deputy's building. To resolve it, move the deputy in and then take 2 pieces from the bag for every robber at that location. Then send any robbers at that location to jail. Once again, the benefit here is all gained by the active player, regardless of the ownership of any tiles around that building. The madam entices resources out of builders. To resolve the madam at a location, draw 1 piece from the bag for each builder in that location, and then send all of the builders to the saloon. The final type of action is to resolve a shootout. The shootout is resolved between 2 players. The winner of the shootout will gain some resources, while there is no penalty for the loser. To resolve the shootout, first each player rolls 1 die. Then, check to see which of the 2 meeples has the highest shooting skill in a shootout. This can be represented by this chart. Deputies have the highest skill, followed by robbers, miners, and builders. The madam can't participate in a shootout. Whoever has the highest shooting skill has the opportunity to re-roll. Then, after this single re-roll, whoever has the higher number wins the shootout. That player draws a number of pieces from the bag equal to the shooting skill of his or her opponent's meeple. This ranges between 1 for builders and 4 for deputies. The winning meeple then moves to the saloon to brag about his or her victory. The meeple that loses the shootout doesn't fare so well and goes to the graveyard. However, the player involved gains no further penalty. If the shootout is a tie between two different types of meeples, then whichever meeple has the higher shooting skill wins the gunfight. If there is a tie between identical types of meeples, then both players gain the resources, but both meeples go to the graveyard. Note that each player has only one shootout disc and cannot have a shootout against himself or herself. If it were the red player's turn and red wanted to place meeples like so, then red would have to choose one opponent to face in this duel. This way, a player is always at least some risk of losing a gunfight. After all meeples have been resolved, you proceed to the check for gold bar phase. If the player has hoarded a number of gold pieces equal to or greater than the lowest cost gold bar remaining on the board, then he or she must cash in those gold pieces for a gold bar. This is not optional, although players will usually want to do this because a gold bar is worth 10 points, whereas the gold pieces spent are worth only 1 each. However, because this is one of the endgame triggers, it does prevent players from hoarding gold and delaying the end of the game. Anytime players release robbers from the jail, one dynamite piece is placed into the mining bag with all of the gold and stone. Any time from that point forward that a player resolves an action and draws one of the dynamite cubes, first completely resolve that meeple, then all players, not just the one who drew the dynamite, must discard half of his or her stone rounded down. These go back into the bag. Then leave the dynamite somewhere near the board or return it to the box. This does not go back into the bag. The player who drew the dynamite can then continue resolving any other meeples he or she still has on the board. The dynamite mechanism gives players an incentive to spend their stone on buildings soon after they get it, rather than trying to hoard it up for one big turn later in the game. The end of the game can be triggered in one of 3 ways. This can be when the third dynamite cube is drawn from the bag and resolved, when a 6th meeple is placed in the graveyard, or when the final gold bar is purchased from the bank. Continue playing until all players have had the same number of turns, and then proceed to endgame scoring. To count their scores, each player gets 10 points per gold bar, 5 or 10 points depending on what's shown on his or her building tiles, and 1 point for each leftover gold. The player with the highest score wins. If tied, whoever has the most combined gold and stone pieces wins, and if still tied, victory is shared.
And that's how to play a Fistful of Meeples. We hope that you enjoyed the video and we hope that it helps you.
Now, if you'd like to see the game in action to get a flavour for how it flows, we have a 1-round playthrough video and you can check that out by clicking on the link in the description below.
If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by hitting the like button. Write in the comments section if you have any feedback or questions. You can also join our Facebook group, Meeple University Community, to share your love for board games.
And finally, if you'd like to be among the first notified of what's new from Meeple University, please consider subscribing to our channel. You can click on the Meeple up in the corner to do so, and do hit the bell for notifications.
Until next time!